the smallest details, the ones no one bothers to notice, are the ones that solve the case or break the heart. I wrote that, you know. My name is Agatha Christie. Yes, that one. The murders, the strange little Belgian with the symmetrical mustache, the sweet old lady who can unravel your alibi while asking whether you take sugar. But tonight, I am not here as the queen of crime. I am here as your slightly sleepless companion with a habit I fully intend to pass on to you, the habit of noticing. You see, I believe the world is an elaborate crime scene, and most people wander through it blindfolded. They miss the half-empty cup on the wrong table, the hesitation before the word yes, the neighbor's cat that stares at the window as if expecting someone it knows will never return. And those overlooked details, they're not just background, they're the real plot twists. They solve the mysteries we don't even know we're living in. By the time we reach the end of tonight's conversation, you will have traveled with me through the scenes of my life. The garden where my first crime was committed. No bodies, unless you count a sponge cake. The war hospital where I learned to read faces like open books. The train journey that rewrote my career. And, yes, the week when I disappeared entirely. You'll hear the clues I followed, the crumbs I trusted more than confessions, and you'll see how these same tricks work perfectly in your own daily life, even if your most serious offense is stealing the last biscuit. But this isn't only about me, it's also about you. I want you to leave tonight with a detective's notebook in your mind, already filling with the kind of observations that change the way you see people. You might start catching yourself hesitating before you speak, hiding a truth in a joke, or placing your glass just so to send a message you hope no one reads. And if you do, I will notice. Before we go any further, a small request. Nothing sinister, no ransom note required. If you enjoy these late-night monologues where we bring great minds and the occasional troublemaker back to life to keep you company before sleep, do tap that like button. Not for vanity, well, not entirely, but because it helps me brew more of these nocturnal investigations into human nature. Consider it your way of leaving a clue that you are here. Now, why call this the art of noticing? Because noticing is more than looking. Looking is passive. Noticing is deliberate. It's the willingness to be wrong, the patience to wait for the second clue, the boldness to believe that the cat in the corner might be important after all. This skill saved me in war, made me friends in unlikely places, and, yes, sold more than a few books. It also once kept me from eating something highly suspicious at a dinner party. I often think the modern world makes noticing harder. In my day, a train carriage was a moving theater. Strangers to observe, conversations to overhear, expressions to catalog. Now everyone's eyes are locked on little glowing screens, oblivious to the man beside them wearing two different shoes. Back then, people stared out of windows. Now they scroll. Life hasn't lost its surprises. People are just too busy missing them. The thing is, once you start noticing, you can't stop. Every room becomes a puzzle. Every conversation a map. You see the way someone's eyes flick to the door when a certain name is spoken, or how their fingers tighten around a glass at a particular subject. You'll catch stories no one intended to tell you. Some of them sweet enough to keep. Others you'll wish you could forget. I won't lie. Noticing can be inconvenient. It's hard to enjoy a party when you've realized the host secretly dislikes the guest of honor. It's harder still to relax on a train when you're fairly sure one passenger plans to get off at the wrong stop on purpose. But it makes life deliciously unpredictable. Every day becomes a case file. Every person, a chapter in progress. So what will you gain by staying with me tonight? First, the chance to see my life as I saw it, in fragments, in glances, in the smallest of clues. Second, the ability to apply this art yourself, whether navigating office politics, meeting someone new, or simply wondering why your friend's text replies have suddenly grown 3 words shorter. And third, the quiet thrill of holding a secret no one else has noticed yet. We'll start at the beginning, naturally, with the first scene where I thought, something here is not quite right. It wasn't in a courtroom, a library, or a shadowy alley. It was in my childhood garden, among hedges taller than castles and roses, sweet enough to hide the faint panic of knowing I was doing something terribly, wonderfully wrong. No corpse, just a sponge cake, but a crime nonetheless. And from that ridiculous moment, a lifetime of noticing began. So, shall we step into the garden together? Leave your shoes by the edge of the path, but not too close to the gate. Gates have a way of swinging open when they shouldn't, and shoes have a way of vanishing entirely. It's the sort of thing one remembers, the sort of thing that, if you follow me tonight, might just solve more than one case in your own story. And that, my dear, is why the first clue to this whole affair starts in my childhood garden. I grew up in a house that looked as though it had been designed specifically to produce secrets. It had corners that collected shadows even at noon, stairs that creaked differently depending on who was climbing them, and a garden that seemed to change size depending on how much trouble I was in. My mother was a firm believer that a child should be allowed to be bored. She considered boredom an essential nutrient, like calcium or fresh air. She would shoo me outside with instructions as vague as go and play, as if play were a destination with its own train station. So I played, which in my case meant I conducted investigations. The crimes of my early career were rarely serious, unless you were the victim. There was the case of the vanishing spoon, solved when I found it buried in the flower bed beside a particularly guilty-looking cat. There was the affair of the ripped curtain, which my mother insisted was just wear and tear, but I remain convinced was the work of a saboteur. And, of course, the great sponge cake heist, in which I was both detective and criminal. The garden was my first crime scene. Roses, hedges, and the occasional wasp formed the borders of my jurisdiction. I patrolled it with the seriousness of a Scotland Yard inspector. A snapped twig, evidence, an overturned watering can, a clear sign of foul play. I didn't know what foul play was, but it sounded too delicious not to use. Even then, I was learning that most mysteries aren't about the big, obvious clues. The missing cake was less important than the fact that someone had cut it with the wrong knife. One from the drawer we never used for guests. That, you see, was a motive. Not for the crime itself, but for knowing exactly who had committed it. As I once told a young friend years later, curiosity is a muscle. Use it or lose it. And mine was doing daily exercises. Children, I think, have an advantage over adults. They're not embarrassed to notice things. A child will point at a stranger and say, Why is that man's hair on the wrong way? An adult will look away and pretend nothing is amiss, as though politeness were more important than accuracy. I never lost that habit of looking directly. I simply learned to do it more discreetly and to write it down for later use. When I look at childhood now, I see how different it is. Modern children have endless entertainment beamed directly into their hands. I don't begrudge them their technology. I'm sure I would have been just as hooked. But I do wonder what they are not seeing while they scroll. They might never experience the peculiar joy of staring out of a window so long that they start to notice the rhythms of the street. The postman's limp, the way Mrs. Fairfax always checks her reflection in the bakery window before going inside. The fact that the milkman's whistle sounds different on Fridays. Those little observations were my textbooks. They taught me that people repeat themselves more than they realize, not just in words, but in gestures, habits, the way their eyes move when they're lying. And they taught me that once you've seen one such pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. The garden also taught me something else, that not all clues are meant to be followed. Sometimes you notice a detail and choose to leave it alone. The trampled flower bed might lead to the neighbor's missing hat, but it might also lead to an explanation you'd rather not have. This is a skill adults often forget. The right to remain curious without acting on it. Of course, I didn't think in such grand terms at the time. I simply liked knowing things other people didn't. My poor family must have grown tired of my sudden proclamations. I know who took the biscuits, or I know why the post was late this morning. I didn't always share the details. Even then, I understood the value of holding a card or two close to one's chest. Looking back, I realized those early cases were more about training my attention than solving anything. It's the same reason pianists do scales or athletes run drills. You notice a little thing every day. The way a door shuts, the smell of rain before it falls, the fact that your sister never hums unless she's hiding something. And before long, noticing is no longer an effort. It's your nature. Sometimes, as I sit now with a notebook, I wonder what I would have become without that garden. Would I still have written? Perhaps, but I doubt I'd have been the same writer. Without those hedges to patrol, without the rose bush that doubled as a hiding place, without the wasp who taught me the importance of patience and distance, I might have missed the understanding that people are as full of clues as any room. And so, when I tell you that the first clue to my whole career started among damp earth and overwatered geraniums, I mean it. That garden was my training ground, my first police station, my laboratory, and the suspects, family, neighbors, pets, were endlessly obliging. I sometimes think every child should have a garden, or at least a street corner, to claim as their own jurisdiction. Somewhere they can learn to stand still, watch, and collect their evidence, not for the sake of solving crimes, but for the sake of seeing the world as a place worth examining. In that way, nothing has changed. I still find myself patrolling spaces in my mind, noting the small misalignments that hint at larger truths. I still believe the difference between understanding someone and missing them entirely can be as small as the choice of a cake knife. And if you're wondering whether that sounds obsessive, well, perhaps it is. But as obsessions go, it's a far more useful one than collecting spoons or memorizing train timetables. At least, I think so. And that, dear listener, is how I learned that curiosity is less about asking questions than about being ready to see the answers when they wander past in the shape of a misplaced hat or a guilty crumb, which is exactly why, when the war came, I was ready to take my observations somewhere far less comfortable and far more dangerous. When the war came, I was 24 and still under the charming delusion that the world, while occasionally inconvenient, was fundamentally sensible. The war corrected that notion with brutal efficiency. I volunteered as a nurse and soon found myself in a hospital where the scent of disinfectant could not quite mask the scent of fear. The corridors echoed with the squeak of rubber soles, the rattle of trolleys, and the low voices of men trying to pretend they were not in pain. It was here, more than anywhere else, that I learned the true value of noticing. In the garden of my childhood, a clue might have meant a broken toy or a missing biscuit. In the ward, a clue could mean the difference between life and death, or between comforting a patient and shattering him. You see, in war, people lie constantly, and often for good reasons. A soldier will tell you he feels fine when he can barely sit up because he doesn't want to be sent home. Another will insist he's in agony because going home is all he wants. The challenge is to know which lie is which, and to act accordingly. I began to study faces as if they were crime scenes. A tiny crease near the eye might mean pain he's too proud to mention. A flicker of the mouth before answering might mean he's hiding something. Sometimes fear, sometimes news from home he doesn't want to share. I became so attuned to these micro-expressions that I could tell, within seconds, which patients would joke with me and which preferred silence. As I once wrote in my notebook, you see, the trick is never in the big clue. It's in the crumbs. The crumbs in this case were the way someone gripped the bed sheets, or how they adjusted their pillow when they thought no one was watching. These skills, I realize now, are just as necessary in the so-called peaceful world we live in today. Modern life has its own wars. Some fought on social media, others in offices, others quietly within ourselves. People curate their faces now, the way soldiers once straightened their uniforms before inspection. But the truth still escapes in the smallest ways. In the pause before replying to a text, in the tightness of a smile during a meeting, in the glance toward the door at a dinner party. In the hospital, I learned to keep my own face still. You cannot flinch at a wound, or the patient will see it. You cannot show alarm when reading a chart, or the family will panic. That's not so different from the performance we all give today, keeping our voices even while speaking to a difficult client, keeping our expressions pleasant while the Wi-Fi collapses in the middle of an important call. Not all my wartime observations were grim. Some were, in their way, absurd. There was the case of the vanishing custard, for instance. One particular patient, I won't name him, though the temptation is strong, had an appetite so specific that he would only eat the dessert if it came in a blue bowl. Every day, like clockwork, the blue bowl would be empty within minutes. Then one day, gone, vanished. The kitchen swore it had been served, but no trace was found. 2 days later, I caught him smuggling it under his blanket, just in case the rations ran short. A man planning for the future, you might say. Humor was as essential as morphine. A ward without humor is like a mystery without a twist. Everyone sees the ending coming, and the journey becomes unbearable. So I made it my business to note not only the signs of distress, but also the signs of mischief. If a man could still manage a practical joke, however feeble, I considered him halfway to recovery. The war taught me that observation is not passive. It's active, deliberate, sometimes exhausting. It's the willingness to look at someone longer than is polite, and to hold in your mind the possibility that what you see is not what they are showing you. When I think of those years, I realize that the habits I built then, the cataloging of small, telling details, became the backbone of my writing. A detective must know which questions to ask, but more importantly, she must know when to ask nothing at all and simply watch. That was a wartime skill, born in silence beside a bed where a man gripped the sheet a fraction too tightly. And I will tell you something else. When you have watched people in such circumstances, you cannot be entirely fooled later by social niceties. I have sat at glittering dinner tables where the smiles were flawless and the lies were silver-plated, and I have known, with the certainty of a nurse reading a chart, that two people were at war beneath the tablecloth. The war stripped away my illusions, but it gave me something better: the ability to survive on what I could see, and the courage to act on it when necessary. You could say that my detective career began in those wards, though my first published murder would come later. There, I was learning to weigh each piece of evidence, however small, and to decide whether it pointed to danger, recovery, or something more complicated. It was this skill of sifting through the smallest clues and trusting my own interpretation that made writing mysteries feel inevitable, which is exactly why, when I began writing, my first murder felt almost preordained. After the war, the world seemed rearranged, and so was I. I had learned to read faces in the wards, to separate truth from performance, pain from polite invention. Once you've acquired that habit, you cannot simply set it down like a finished cup of tea. My first murder on paper felt, therefore, almost inevitable. All that remained was to choose a detective who could see the world with the same obsessive precision I had come to trust. Enter Hercule Poirot. I didn't so much invent him as spot him, the way one might notice a rare bird in a hedgerow, not by its size, but by the way it holds itself. He was inspired by a Belgian refugee I encountered during the war, a man of such meticulous habits that even his mustache seemed to stand at attention. Orderly to the point of reverence, he was the sort who would realign your teacup with the table's edge mid-conversation, without pausing his sentence. In the chaos of post-war England, such order felt almost rebellious. Everyone else seemed to be improvising their lives. Poirot was polishing his shoes. I think part of me envied that certainty. You see, for Poirot, the smallest irregularity was not background noise. It was the opening note of the symphony. A chair moved half an inch, a single muddy footprint. To him, these were not accidents. They were invitations. As I once wrote in my notebook, the trick is never in the big clue, it's in the crumbs. Creating him was my way of giving permanence to the skills I had learned, and, perhaps, of protecting them. In a novel, a clue is safe. In life, it can be dangerous. Poirot allowed me to explore this truth from a comfortable distance, while still teaching the same lesson. Observe, deduce, and never underestimate the power of a well-timed silence. There is something almost unnervingly modern about Poirot, actually. In our current world, information travels faster than thought, and the temptation is always to grab the first big piece of evidence and sprint away with it. Social media, I suspect, would have been Poirot's personal nightmare. Endless assumptions drawn from a single photograph, judgments delivered in seconds. He would, I am certain, have refused to post anything without first aligning his desk blotter and rereading his own words 3 times. Writing those early novels was like opening the door to a room I'd been peeking into all my life. The plots came easily, or at least the crimes did. The challenge was always the human element, giving each suspect a truth they desperately wanted to hide and a face they hoped would hide it. I wrote exactly as I observed, starting from a single detail, then tugging the thread until the whole fabric shifted. Of course, even Poirot could not contain all my observations. That is why Miss Marple appeared a few years later, a deceptively gentle woman who understood that the entire world could be explained by the goings-on in a small village. She was born from my noticing, the speed at which gossip travels, the way small-town kindness can sit cheek by jowl with ruthless curiosity. In those early years, my own life was still unsettled. England was rebuilding, and so was I. I wrote at odd hours, in borrowed rooms, often with tea that had gone cold long before I remembered it. Some habits never change. There was no guarantee my books would find an audience. I was simply writing what I knew, that truth hides in plain sight, and that most people, being in a hurry, never stoop to look. And perhaps that is why readers connected with Poirot so quickly. He gave them permission to slow down, to inspect the arrangement of objects on a mantelpiece, to suspect the perfectly polite man at the end of the table. He turned, noticing, into an art form, which, I suppose, is exactly what I was trying to do for myself. Looking back, those first novels were the foundations of a house I would spend decades expanding. Each taught me something new, about pacing, about misdirection, about the delicious moment when the reader realizes they have been looking entirely the wrong way. But they also taught me discipline, not just in writing, but in life. Poirot's tidy habits seeped into my own routines. I kept my writing desk clear, my pencil sharp, my notes in precise order. It wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about creating a space where the mind could notice freely. That is something anyone can take into modern life. You do not need to be a detective or a novelist to benefit from order. In a chaotic world, a little structure is not a prison. It is a lens. It focuses you. It shows you the gap in the pattern. Of course, there is danger in living too much inside your own fiction. The world outside my books was full of trains, ships, and chance encounters calling to me. And as I would soon discover, one cannot live only in fiction. Unless, of course, one boards a train headed nowhere, which is precisely what I did next. But one cannot live only in fiction, unless, of course, one boards a train headed nowhere. The train has always been my favorite setting. both in life and on the page. It's the perfect stage for observation, a confined space, a rotating cast of characters, and the irresistible tension of knowing you will all be trapped together until the journey's end, or until someone mysteriously vanishes at a stop they had no intention of reaching. The Orient Express was, of course, the jewel in that crown. Even before I wrote about it, I adored its atmosphere. The hushed clink of china in the dining car, the rhythmic shudder of wheels on rails, the faint, conspiratorial quality of conversations conducted in 3 different languages at once. It was a moving theater, and I had the best seat in the house. I would sit in my compartment, notebook ready, pretending to read while my eyes cataloged everything. A man in an impeccable suit, but with a button sewn on in haste, perhaps by someone else's hand. A woman with perfect lipstick but a nervous tic that made her glance at the corridor every few minutes. You see, the trick in a train is that you cannot help but reveal yourself. Sooner or later, you will drop your guard and your teacup. In the stillness between stations, even the smallest gestures grow loud. A cough sounds like an accusation. The shifting of luggage overhead feels like someone hiding evidence. And the silences. The silences on a train can be far more dangerous than words. Traveling by train is not so different from the modern open-plan office. You are in close quarters with strangers, or worse, acquaintances, for hours on end, all pretending to focus on your own affairs while actually eavesdropping shamelessly. The only real difference is that on a train, the scenery changes. In an office, the closest you get to that is when Kevin from accounting changes his desktop wallpaper. As I once wrote in my notebook, one should never underestimate a quiet afternoon, nor a quiet person. And trains are full of quiet people. The kind who read in the corner or gaze out of the window, or, most suspiciously of all, appear to be doing nothing at all. I have a theory that every long train journey contains at least one secret. Sometimes it's as small as a clandestine love affair. Sometimes it's large enough to require police involvement. And sometimes it's absurd, like the time I became convinced that a certain gentleman in the next compartment had stolen a cushion from the dining car. He denied it, of course. But the way he avoided eye contact when I passed him in the corridor was, frankly, an admission of guilt. Travel by train also teaches you patience, something I fear the modern traveler has lost. Airplanes hurry you from one place to another, sealing you in metal and feeding you indistinguishable meals. Cars give you the illusion of control. But a train? A train forces you to surrender to its rhythm. You must accept delays, unexpected stops, and the possibility that the man opposite will eat boiled eggs for the entire journey. For a writer, there is no better laboratory. The compartments are like chapters, the passengers, living drafts of characters I might yet use. I learned to listen for inconsistencies, to notice when a detail didn't match the story. Why did the man who claimed to be going to Paris have a timetable for Milan? Why did the woman with the enormous hat eat alone, but order 2 coffees? These are the crumbs that lead to the cake. Or cow. The Orient Express with its velvet seats and impeccable service, was the perfect place to set a murder. It was opulent enough to feel safe, enclosed enough to be dangerous, and cosmopolitan enough that every accent might conceal an entirely different past. That's the thing about travel. It's the one time when people expect to be out of context. They will tell you things on a train they would never confess in their own sitting room. I often think that's why so many of my crimes take place in transit. On a train, a ship, or a plane, the usual boundaries are suspended. People become versions of themselves they could never sustain at home. They're braver, riskier, or simply sloppier. And crucially, they cannot leave when the conversation turns inconvenient. You don't have to take the Orient Express to practice this kind of observation. You could do it on your morning commute. Look at the way people hold their phones. Is it a shield, a distraction, a weapon? Notice how they react when the train slows unexpectedly. There is always one person who panics, one who smiles because they've just been granted more time before a meeting, and one who doesn't even notice, too lost in whatever small drama is unfolding on their screen. Trains, like mysteries, are about anticipation. The journey is as important as the destination. And, like a good plot, a train ride has its twists. An unexpected delay, a stranger changing seats, a sudden announcement in a language you don't speak. You learn to adapt, to watch for the change that shifts everything. For all the journeys I took, though, the strangest voyage of all was one where I wasn't writing, or researching, or even trying to notice. I was gone, not from a train, but from my own life entirely. And when I returned, the world and I were never quite the same. Of all the journeys I have taken, by train, by ship, even by imagination, the strangest was the one in which I vanished entirely, not in fiction, in life. The year was 1926. Winter had closed its damp gray fist around England, and one December evening, I left my home and did not return. It sounds dramatic, doesn't it? Newspapers certainly thought so. The headlines were a curious blend of horror, fascination, and outright invention. Some claimed I had been kidnapped. Others suspected suicide. One paper even suggested I was hiding in disguise to spy on the man I loved. In truth, the reality was far less sensational, though perhaps far more human. I was exhausted. My marriage was crumbling. My mother had recently died, and I felt like a character trapped in a plot she'd never agreed to. My mind was fogged, like a train window in winter. And so, I stepped out of my life for a while. Where did I go? To a spa hotel in Harrogate, of all places, where I signed in under another name. Yes, I know, terribly cliche for a mystery writer, but I wanted to be unfindable, even to myself. I remember thinking that if I could live as someone else for just a little while, perhaps I could return to being myself with less effort. In a way, it was an experiment. What happens if you vanish from your own story? Who takes over the narration? And, most intriguingly, how do the other characters react? Spoiler: not always as you'd expect. Modern life has its own versions of such disappearances. Some call it a digital detox, others call it quiet quitting. But the principle is the same. You withdraw from your usual roles and you see what and who remains. The difference now is that the world sends its search parties in the form of frantic WhatsApp messages and tagged Instagram posts. As I once wrote in my notebook, sometimes vanishing is the only way to be seen again. It's remarkable how absence sharpens people's focus. When you're there every day, you blend into the wallpaper. When you vanish, you become the entire painting. Of course, my own vanishing act caused a scandal. The police searched, the press speculated, and my poor husband looked rather more suspicious than he might have preferred. Let's just say public sympathy was not entirely on his side. Friends offered theories, most of them absurd. One insisted I had gone abroad disguised as a man. Another swore I was on a secret archaeological dig. The truth? I was sitting in a quiet lounge, drinking tea that was never quite hot enough. Some things never change. And reading novels that were not mine. For once, I had no deadlines, no drafts, no suspects to assemble. Just hours to think, or not think at all. It's tempting to romanticize it now, to call it brave or radical, but in the moment, it was simply necessary. I think we all have thresholds, invisible lines we can't cross without losing something essential. Mine came that winter, and stepping away felt like the only way to preserve, well, me. The experience taught me something valuable. Control is sometimes found not in holding on, but in letting go. In mysteries, the detective always seeks to contain chaos. But life is not obliged to follow detective logic. Sometimes you step back, and the chaos untangles itself in your absence. When I returned, the world was both unchanged and entirely different. The newspapers had moved on to fresher scandals. Friends were relieved. My husband and I were no longer quite the same, but I had learned that I could rewrite myself if I needed to, not just on paper, but in life. I don't necessarily recommend disappearing without warning. It tends to alarm people and inspire unwanted biographies. But I do recommend, at least once, stepping so far out of your routine that you can no longer see it in the same way. Take yourself out of the plot. Let someone else turn the pages for a bit. And if you're wondering whether anyone tried to follow me in Harrogate, yes, one woman did seem unusually interested in my crossword puzzles and my preference for ginger biscuits. I made a note of her in my secret notebook. If she's listening now, I hope she knows she made an excellent minor character. Disappearance is not about erasing yourself. It's about redrawing the outline. Sometimes you come back sharper, more deliberate, more yourself than before, and, in my case, ready to write again. When I returned to my desk, the words came differently. I had learned what it was to be both the author and the missing person in the story, and that, I think, gave my work a new kind of truth, one you can only earn by walking off the page for a while. When I returned, the world and I were never quite the same. When I returned, the world and I were never quite the same, but the work was waiting, and with it, the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle to be solved. Over the years, people have asked me, "Agatha, what's your secret? How do you always find the killer?" As if I were actually chasing criminals between cups of tea. The truth is, the same rules apply whether you're solving a fictional murder or navigating an awkward dinner party. A good investigation, like a good life, is built on 3 things: patience, observation, and a stubborn refusal to jump to conclusions. Patience first. In books, the reader sees only the edited version, the brisk interview, the perfectly timed revelation. In reality, and in my notebooks, there are long, uneventful stretches, hours where nothing happens, except that everything happens. A suspect hesitates a fraction too long before answering. Someone rearranges a vase without noticing they've done it. Patience gives you the luxury of spotting the moment when the mask slips. Modern life is allergic to patience. We want answers before the question has even left our lips. Your phone pings, you reply. A headline appears, you believe it. In my experience, the faster the conclusion, the more likely it is to be wrong. If you learn anything from me tonight, let it be this. Let the story breathe before you decide how it ends. Second, observation, the heartbeat of every mystery. It's not just seeing, it's registering. Most people notice a man in a brown coat. The detective notices the rain marks on the left shoulder only and realizes he's been standing under a narrow awning. The novelist wonders why he didn't step inside. The woman in me wonders if he's waiting for someone who never came. In the cafe down the street from me, I once spotted a man who paid for his tea with a crumpled foreign note, then folded the change into his left sock. Was he a spy, a fugitive, or just eccentric? I didn't find out, but the detail went into my secret notebook, right between woman who ordered 5 eclairs and ate none, and child who swapped coats with another child on purpose. As I once wrote in my notebook, you see, the trick is never in the big clue, it's in the crumbs. And in life, those crumbs are often what you overlook because you're too busy scanning for cake. Third, resist the urge to decide too soon. In fiction, premature conclusions are called red herrings. In life, they're called mistakes, often expensive ones. The quiet colleague may not be aloof, just tired. The neighbor who never waves may be painfully shy, not unfriendly. The man who seems too good to be true, well, sometimes he is. But you'll only know if you keep watching. Now, between you and me, I've been observing you this entire time. Yes, you. That slight shift just now? Either you adjusted your blanket or you're concealing a clue. No need to confess. I'll find out before the end. A good investigator also understands the importance of silence. You can learn more from what someone doesn't say than from all their polished sentences. In an age where everyone feels obliged to fill the air or the feed with noise, cultivating silence is practically a superpower. It's the same with reading people's modern crime scenes, Instagram feeds, Zoom calls, workplace Slack channels. I can tell you more about a person from the one thing they don't post than from 50 things they do. If Poirot were alive today, he would scroll slowly, making mental notes, and refuse to like anything until he'd solved the entire puzzle. Of course, all these rules mean very little without the most essential quality of all, curiosity. And curiosity, I've found, is not a hobby. It's a way of moving through the world. It keeps you alert to the shifting light, the odd choice, the almost imperceptible sigh. It makes life richer, not because you'll always find the answer, but because you'll always have a reason to keep looking. Running gag aside, yes, I am still watching you. I genuinely believe that if more people approach their days like a case file, they'd make fewer regrettable decisions. Read the room before you speak. Notice the pause before, "I'm fine." And for heaven's sake, if you're planning to commit a social faux pas, at least make it interesting enough for me to use in a story. There's comfort in these methods too. The world is unpredictable, yes, but the skill of noticing is something you carry with you. It turns chaos into something you can map. It turns strangers into characters, and days into chapters. And sometimes, those crumbs lead straight back to the quietest room, the one in your mind where you put the pieces together. I suspect that's where you're heading now, isn't it? That quiet place. Keep going, but take my rules with you. You never know when you might need them. Every case begins with a crime, but every crime begins with a reason. That is what has always fascinated me more than the act itself. After all, anyone can place poison in a teacup. The mechanics are child's play. But what makes a person decide to do it? That, my dear, is the riddle worth unraveling. As I once wrote in my notebook, one should never underestimate a quiet afternoon, nor a quiet person. Stillness is often the perfect disguise for dangerous thoughts. In my stories, every culprit has a motive, however twisted. Love, greed, jealousy, pride, or the tidy resolution of an inconvenient problem. In real life, motives are often far pettier. A theft committed out of spite, a betrayal born of boredom. And yes, I have seen lifelong friendships collapse over something as laughable as the arrangement of chairs at dinner. The stage changes, but the psychology remains. Today, the manor house is replaced by a WhatsApp group, the sealed envelope by a leaked screenshot, the poison pen letter by a reckless reply all. The human heart has not evolved nearly as much as our technology likes to claim. What intrigues me most are the lies we tell to be polite. You look wonderful when we mean you look dreadful. I'm fine when we are crumbling. In a detective story, such fictions are the ivy that slowly covers the house. Pretty enough, but capable of hiding the cracks. And, since honesty is our subject, you're wearing a rather curious expression at this very moment. Yes, you, that little smile. Are you agreeing with me, or recalling one of your own harmless little lies? Don't trouble yourself. I'm not here to arrest you. Yet. The trouble with understanding motives is that it makes judging people far more difficult. Once you know why someone has done something dreadful, you might almost forgive them. Or worse, you might see how easily you could have done the same. This is why Poirot, wise man, guards himself from too much sympathy. He understands that sentiment blurs the edges of justice. Motives are rarely pure. Even generosity can wear a shadow. I once based a character on a woman I met in a hotel lounge. She invited a destitute man into her home, not out of kindness, but so she could tell her friends she had done it. When he later stole her jewelry, she seemed more wounded by the loss of her saintly reputation than by the missing pearls. The modern variant? A photograph on social media captioned, "Just doing my part," arranged with perfect lighting and a touch of self-congratulation. Human nature, I assure you, is remarkably consistent. If you wish to be a better observer, and I do hope you are taking notes, pay attention when a person's words, and their tone don't quite match. The friend who insists she's over it, but can't stop bringing it up. The colleague who claims not to care about the project's outcome, but watches every update like a hawk. The politician who promises clarity while speaking in riddles. In truth, much of our daily behavior could be described as pre-crime. We prepare our alibis before anyone has accused us of anything. I didn't see your message. I was just about to call you. These are the little rehearsals of self-defense we all perform, often without noticing. The uncomfortable truth is that anyone, you, me, the man who pours your coffee, is capable of deception, given the right pressure. Understanding this is not cynicism, it is clarity. If you know what someone wants, you can guess what they might do to get it. Sometimes, the kindest face in the room is simply the one that hasn't yet been tested. This, I think, is why I never tire of writing mysteries. They are never truly about the murder. They are about the masks. And it is astonishing, in both life and fiction, how often the mask proves more dangerous than the face beneath. Which brings me to the final clue in my story. And it is not in my books at all. It lies somewhere far quieter, far more personal. If you're willing, I'll take you there next. In the end, my dear, the most extraordinary treasure I ever found was not a priceless diamond or a long-lost will. It was a well-brewed cup of tea at precisely the right temperature, which, I assure you, is rarer than any cursed emerald. By the later years of my life, I had stopped chasing the spectacular. Not that I ever truly chased it. The spectacular tends to arrive when one is minding one's own business. No, I found that the great reward of surviving long enough was permission to live quietly, to choose one's company, to arrange one's days like flowers in a vase, deliberately, sparingly, and with the stems trimmed to the right length. As I once wrote in a letter never meant to be sent, contentment is not the absence of mystery. It is the ability to enjoy it without the urge to solve it. People imagine a famous writer's later life to be a blur of interviews, adoring fans, and manuscript deadlines. In truth, mine was filled with the domestic rhythms I had always secretly preferred. The morning walk to check on the roses, the afternoon spent at my desk, not always writing, sometimes simply staring. The comforting routine of tea at 4 o'clock. Ah, but tea. Let us address the tragicomic fact. In all my years, it was almost never at the temperature I wanted. Too hot and it scalds. Too cool and it sulks in the cup. I have sometimes suspected this is life's sly way of reminding us that perfection is fleeting, and perhaps not to be trusted. You see, the frenzy of youth teaches us to seek excitement, while the calm of later years whispers that excitement is terribly overrated. I no longer needed to board the Orient Express to meet fascinating strangers. I had learned that the gardener, the postman, the woman in the corner table of the cafe, all had stories worthy of a novel, if one only looked closely enough. And yes, I am looking closely at you now. Don't fidget. You're giving me the air of someone with at least 3 untold anecdotes and 1 minor scandal. In those years, I became an unrepentant collector of small pleasures. The smell of old books, the sound of a fire catching in the grate, the feel of a perfectly sharpened pencil. No dramatic plot twists, just the steady, satisfying rhythm of life, lived at a pace one can actually keep. It's not fashionable, I know. We are told, even in what should be our restful seasons, to be productive, relevant, endlessly visible. I ignored all that. I found that invisibility, the kind one earns, not the kind imposed, is a gift. When the world stops expecting constant appearances, you are free to notice it more fully, which is, I suppose, the heart of the thing, noticing. I had built my life's work on it, but only later did I learn to savor it without turning every observation into a plot device. A hand resting on a book, a shadow falling across a table, the exact shade of twilight in September. These were no longer clues to be chased, but jewels to be kept in the mind's pocket. I think the modern world could use a touch more of this deliberate idleness. You can keep your endless scrolling and your urgent emails. I'll take a seat by the window and the pleasure of watching the light change on the wall. Of course, the detective in me never entirely retired. I still noticed the neighbor's new shoes and wondered about the source of her sudden cheer. I still heard the faint hesitation in a visitor's laugh and thought, there's a story there. But I no longer felt compelled to pull the thread. It was enough to know the tapestry was rich. As I once told a young fan who asked me how to live a happy life, don't try to collect moments the way you collect stamps. Let them find you, and for heaven's sake, don't paste them down. They lose their life that way. By the way, if we've been together this long tonight, you're already practicing this art, letting a story unfold at its own pace. Perhaps without realizing it, you've been sitting in your own quiet afternoon, sharing it with me. And isn't that rather nice? Which brings us, quite naturally, to the final page of tonight's little case. We've examined the evidence, followed the clues, wandered through the past. And now, as in any good mystery, there's only one thing left to do. Close the file and let the ending settle over you like the last light before evening. And so, the case of tonight's sleeplessness comes to its final page. You and I have sifted through a great deal of evidence together tonight, haven't we? We began in my childhood garden, followed the trail through wartime wards, lingered in train compartments, and even entertained the peculiar case of my own vanishing. Piece by piece, you've picked up the crumbs I've left for you. Now we find ourselves here, at the quietest point of the evening, with the casebook open and all the clues laid out before us. As I once wrote in my notebook, every case ends not with the arrest, but with the hush of understanding. Understanding, I've discovered, is never about knowing every fact. It's about noticing just enough, the faintest quiver in someone's voice, the way steam curls from a teacup before vanishing into the air, the half-second pause before a confession, or the way a person looks out of the window when they don't wish to answer. In fiction, I made entire murders turn on such moments. In life, they're the quiet hinges on which everything swings. I suspect, and forgive me, but it is in my nature to suspect, that you have been practicing without even meaning to. You've sat here with me, unhurried. You've let the silences stretch like the soft creak of an old floorboard. You've tolerated my endless complaints about tea temperature, tonight's cup by the way, is tragically lukewarm. All of this is proof, my dear, that you're beginning to master the art of noticing. One should never underestimate a quiet evening, nor the person willing to share it. And now, I must confess something that every detective eventually learns. The world outside this room will do its best to make you hurry. It will push you into fast trains and faster opinions. It will invite you to scroll, skim, and skip ahead. But there is no solving anything that way. Not a crime, not a question, not even your own restless thoughts. Let the world rush by if it must. There will always be another carriage, another headline, another trivial mystery to consume your attention. But there will not always be this exact hour, this precise shade of night outside your window, this particular rhythm of your own breathing, this quiet conversation between us. Those are one-time only clues, and when they're gone, they are gone. As I told a young friend years ago, some clues are meant only for you. Guard them as you would a secret. Tomorrow, if you are willing to indulge me, take just one moment to find something no one else sees. Perhaps it will be a button lying on the pavement, or the shadow of a cat stretching across a brick wall, or the smell of fresh bread as you pass a shop. Don't photograph it. Don't post it. Don't even mention it aloud. Simply keep it in your mental casebook. Let it be yours alone. Because here's the great twist. Life's most important clues are not meant to be solved. They're meant to be savored. When I look back on my own story, the memories I keep are not the perfectly tied up endings. They are the imperfect, dangling details. The scent of lilies in an empty room, the creak of a hotel corridor in the small hours, the feel of a well-worn pen in my hand. In my novels, I always let the reader think it was the grand reveal they enjoyed. But really, it was the atmosphere, the soft weight of anticipation that stayed with them. It is the same with tonight. You might think you'll remember the lessons I've so cleverly woven in. Patience, observation, the danger of hot tea served cold. But what will truly remain is the tone of this hour. The way it felt to have your thoughts wander alongside mine. And if I may be entirely honest, that is the part of the mystery I like best, when the audience becomes the accomplice. Now, before we close the file, let me give you one last clue, and it is a callback to where we began. The smallest details, the ones no one bothers to notice, are the ones that solve the case or break the heart. You see, we have come full circle. The smallest details are not just the key to solving crimes. They are the key to living without letting life slip past you unnoticed. So, my dear fellow investigator, I believe it is time to close the casebook. The lamps are low. The air is heavy with that in-between scent, a little of the day still lingering, a little of the night already here. Somewhere outside, a breeze moves through the leaves, carrying with it a faint sound of footsteps that may or may not be real. And here, between us, the file is complete. I will leave you now to your own private deductions. There are no more suspects here, only dreams. Close your eyes. Let the curtain fall softly. The investigation is over.